The National Center on Improving Literacy presents Succeeding with Dyslexia. Julianne Masser, doctoral candidate, school psychology, University of Oregon.
I'm Julianne Masser. I'm 26 years old. I currently attend the University of Oregon school psychology PhD program, and I'm a member of the team at the National Center on Improving Literacy. I have a strong interest in early literacy instruction and assessment, and I'm passionate about teaching students to read.
Early experiences learning to read.
Honestly, when I think back to my early experiences learning to read, I don't have a lot of positive memories. What comes to mind is a lot of frustration, a lot of tears, and just exasperation at struggling to learn to read. My experiences in school, unfortunately, are similar. I just remember feeling frustrated that other kids were clearly easily learning to read, and I wasn't. And although I remember educators being passionate and caring deeply about me and trying to support me, I also remember them seeming a bit lost, not understanding why I was struggling, and seeing my frustration and sadness and recognizing that they needed to do something to help me, but not exactly feeling like they knew how.
Dyslexia identification.
I was diagnosed with dyslexia in the winter of 1997. I was 6 years old in the first grade. I was diagnosed at Lee Pesky Learning Center in Boise, Idaho. Based on all that frustration and hardship that I was experiencing trying to learn to read as a first grader, I have a specific memory of knowing that I wasn't doing well in school. And I think sometimes people push back and think, well, how can a first grader really know that they're not doing well in school yet? But it becomes really glaringly obvious as a child with learning disability that other people are doing well, or things are coming naturally or easy to them, and they're not coming naturally or easy to you. And so I remember getting N's for needs improvement and I's for is improving, rather than A, B's, C's, and D's on a report card. And I remember trying to correct all of my I's into E's and my N's into M's for meets expectations or exceeds expectations. And this kind of obvious forgery obviously worried my parents and concerned my teachers. Like, wow, Julianne's having a lot of anxiety about not achieving. Let's figure out what's going on. And so my parents took me to Lee Pesky Learning Center, and I was evaluated. I remember having countless medical vision screenings and hearing screenings as well. And I didn't know at the time, but obviously what those were showing is that there wasn't something going on with my vision. There wasn't something going on with my hearing. And I went to Lee Pesky Learning Center and was evaluated by the educators and psychologists there. And then they told my parents that I was dyslexic, and that getting a diagnosis of dyslexia was empowering, knowing that I was different and I just learned differently, and that this was impacting me, but I wasn't stupid and I had a lot of other strengths, I think was helpful.
Intervention that worked for dyslexia.
I got diagnosed and then started receiving academic intervention services at Lee Pesky with their educators, and then I also was found eligible for special education in the first grade. I had an IEP, and I started getting small group reading instruction with my teachers at school as well. I know that I was getting evidence-based phonics instruction and getting activities in phonemic awareness and high rates of opportunities to respond and letter-sound correspondence and phonics instruction. But at the time, I obviously didn't know any of that yet. And my main memories of the reading instruction I got at Lee Pesky was just that it was exhausting and that I was having to respond constantly, and I was the only one in the room, and it was one-on-one intensive instruction. And I remember just feeling exhausted leaving those sessions. I also remember feeling more successful at Lee Pesky in those intervention services than any other part of school, because now what I know is that I was getting appropriate scaffolds and immediate error corrections, but as a kid, I just remember thinking, okay, I'm learning to read here. Like, it was just really frustrating. But I know now that that was the instruction I needed, and it was evidence-based and explicit phonics instruction. But at the time, I just remember thinking it was exhausting and a lot of extra work.
What is it like to be dyslexic?
As I became more successful and I was able to learn to read, I knew that it was working. I knew that the instruction was working, but that didn't make having to go to extra hours of reading instruction and stay in at recess that much easier. I remember in first grade, second grade, when we would do popcorn reading, where you got to call on your friend. You would read a line, and then you were supposed to call on your friend, and then they were supposed to read aloud. And I remember having sweaty palms anytime we did that activity. I was really having a fight or flight response to having to read out loud because I knew I wouldn't be successful. I knew it would take way longer than it was taking any of my peers. I knew I'd get singled out, and I didn't want to do that. And I remember sometimes I would get called on, and I would just pretend I didn't know where we were because I knew that if you pretended that you didn't know where you were in the story, then they'd say, oh, you weren't following along, you don't get to have a turn. And I would say, oh, great, I didn't want a turn. And I wouldn't have to read out loud. So I do remember having that just increasing anxiety about being singled out as someone who couldn't read. At that point, third, fourth grade, I had encountered a lot of frustration and resistance with my own family. They tried to help me, but they didn't know. My parents didn't know how to help me. They loved and supported me unconditionally, but they didn't know how to help me with reading. And so I didn't want to have to encounter that at home, so I would choose to just stay in and get the work done. So again, just developing those work ethic and determination skills at such a young age. And I just remember feeling like everyone else is looking at me. Everyone thinks I'm stupid. And no matter what, even all the adults in my life who loved and supported me said that wasn't true, I still felt that way. I remember that I continued to read below grade level throughout. To this day, I mean, if we were to call something grade level reading, I think I would read below grade level. But that doesn't mean I can't be successful in school. And it doesn't mean that I can't work extra hard to achieve at a level that other people are. And then I think it makes me even more proud of myself that I can achieve at this level, given this adversity and given the fact that I have dyslexia. One of my proudest accomplishments a lot of the time is that I don't appear different because I work so hard to achieve at a level where no one would even question my ability to be successful in graduate school.
How has dyslexia impacted your life?
Learning when I did need to self-advocate for some of those accommodations, and sometimes as a young adult, I felt like that was kind of cheating because I would think, well, I can kind of do this, it'll take some extra work, I don't really need extra time on the test, I don't really need an audiobook, I could read it. But it was grueling and exhausting and way harder for me than it was for someone else. And so learning that I should just access what I need and self-advocate. So I remember needing to read The Scarlet Letter. And no one wants to read The Scarlet Letter in 11th grade language arts. And crying because I couldn't read the amount of chapters. And I didn't have some of the vocabulary background knowledge and just couldn't understand what I was reading. And my mom normalizing that experience for me and explaining that, like, that's probably the way a lot of 11th graders feel, not just you. That's not necessarily about your dyslexia. And her saying, we'll just go buy the audiobook. We'll just go get the CD at Barnes & Noble. So she went and got the CD. And then I remember all my friends saying, oh, can I borrow that? Can I borrow your CD after you use it? I was like, oh, this is a modification that helps me, but other people want to access it too because this is just a difficult text for any of us. I remember that normalization feeling really good. Like, okay, this isn't just me. Early on, as a child with dyslexia, learned to be quite successful by simply listening to instruction and then repeating that, memorizing it, and knowing what to do. Because if you can't read the worksheet, you can't read the directions on the board, you're going to get pretty darn good at listening to the directions, retaining that, and then trying to do your work, especially if you're a child who's trying to succeed and doesn't like to fail and feels a lot of failure in school. I had the most wonderful, loving, supportive parents. And my dad would read the chapter to me and ask me comprehension questions throughout it and make sure that I was accessing the text. And sometimes I would read it myself, or I would do the review questions myself. But I remember he would just read it out loud to me and then talk to me about his background knowledge about certain wars or historic figures. And I remember thinking like, wow, this learning disability does make me have to work harder, but it also allows me to have these like cool opportunities to learn in a different way and spend extra time with my parents. Although it was stigmatizing and sometimes isolating to have to walk back into school and kids wonder, where have you been? What have you been doing? And feeling different, there was also these positives that I was getting out of this. I was getting to feel more successful, less time to feel like a failure at school, getting to feel successful in intervention services, and then also getting to spend this extra time with my parents on top of that. And so I remember feeling, and I still do, I feel so grateful to the educators who helped me learn to read, but I feel so grateful to my parents who worked hard to advocate for me as a young child to get me the services I needed, and then on top of that to make sure I could access those services and changing their whole lives to help me be successful. Because if they knew, all right, this is frustrating for us trying to teach her to read, we don't want to do that, what can we do to help her? And making sure that I got that evidence-based instruction, and it just makes me feel really supported as an adult too. I think there's no way that I would be doing what I am today if I wasn't dyslexic. I'm in the doctoral program that I am, I think, because I'm dyslexic. I am passionate about reading instruction because I'm dyslexic. I don't think I would have the insight into what it's like to be a kid and a teacher with a learning disability if I myself wasn't dyslexic. And it makes me just so passionate about making sure that all students can access evidence-based literacy instruction across the nation, regardless of where they go to school.
What would you say to a student with dyslexia?
I can tell you that because of how hard I had to work, that has paid off tenfold as an adult. I developed work ethic and determination at the age of 7 and 8 because nothing came easy to me in school. And I knew I was different, but now that I developed that work ethic and determination, I just am so resilient in the face of other adversity. I have really strong time management skills. I have really good study habits. I know that hard work can allow you to achieve things and be successful because I learned that at such a young age. And so I think being a child with dyslexia, being anyone with dyslexia or any learning disability, has you develop those skills at such a young age that you don't have to develop them as a young adult, or when you encounter challenges in college, or for me now in graduate school, I just have the skills to work through adversity in difficult times, and I have the time management to be successful when you have a lot of homework or a lot of things to do. I was lucky enough to be able to be a collegiate athlete in college, and I think that a lot of the time I saw a shock to the other people's systems, like how am I going to handle practice and homework and lecture and travel? And I had always had to juggle soccer practice with extra reading homework and regular homework, and it had always taken me such a longer time that I had all the skills to manage that, and I wasn't having to develop that at age 18 or 19 because I had developed it at age 6 to 8. So although as a kid it can feel really unfair because it seems like everybody else doesn't have to work as hard, it'll really pay off in the end because you're having to work so hard from such a young age. And then other people all of a sudden have to develop those skills and kind of hit a surprise moment. And for you, you just keep running through and continue to be successful because you've developed those skills as a kid.
Final thoughts.
If we know what works for reading instruction, I want to make sure that we can have all kids learn to read, even with dyslexia, because I know that's what worked for me and it's what will work for other people. Yes, it continues to impact me. I wouldn't be doing this as a career if I didn't think that teaching kids to read was super important with learning disabilities and kids with dyslexia. But I think I just work really hard on a daily basis to make sure that I can overcome that. And yeah, it probably takes me a little bit longer to do some of my assignments and my reading and my writing, but that doesn't mean I can't be successful. It just means it requires a little bit of extra work and a little bit of extra effort. And I'm okay with that because that's a really good life skill, and you got to work extra hard to get things you want. So I think that's all right with me.
National Center on Improving Literacy. The research reported here is funded by awards to the National Center on Improving Literacy from the Office of Elementary and Secondary Education in partnership with the Office of Special Education Programs, award number S283D160003. The opinions expressed are those of the authors and do not represent views of OESE, OSEP, or the U.S. Department of Education. Copyright National Center on Improving Literacy.